administration was saw the beginning of the unraveling of US hegemony that has opened a period of a vacuum period of conflict and geopolitical chaos. And although in previous times many historians saw him as a man who was out of time in between two different geopolitical orders, I think now we can see him actually as standing at the beginning, right at the precipice of the worlds that we've inhabited for the past number of years since his administration. And so in that sense, he's an initiator of many of the trends that we see in the world around us today, rather than someone who was out of place. Jimmy Carter is a rather contradictory character whose foreign policy vision was somewhat incoherent, because he was both a Cold War president presiding over a vast global military infrastructure, as well as the first in a line of post-Vietnam or neoliberal presidents in whose decisions we can see many signs of the world that we live in today. So that sense of contradiction, I think, is important to his legacy. His most significant contribution, of course, is that he was famous for his vision of human rights as a new paradigm for US foreign policy. But to my mind, at least, I would say probably perhaps even more significant is the fact of his unwillingness to sanction military intervention or airstrikes as a customary tool of US foreign policy, which makes his presidency a historically unusual interlude between the major military commitments of both the Vietnam era and the near relentless aerial bombardment from the Bush senior administration onwards, not to mention all the small wars of the Reagan era. So even as his presidency shares these elements with the Cold War figures and those who come afterwards, and even though this commitment to human rights was sometimes criticized for being selective, or for precisely perhaps because of its selective nature, was sometimes criticized as being a fig leaf for more traditional or naked American national security interests. It nonetheless did function, I think, as this important interlude, and offered a promise difficult to realize in the context of the Cold War. It offered a promise for a new way of doing US foreign policy, and certainly the president, or the former president, really built upon and worked very hard to promote that vision of human rights in his post-presidency years. The two singular achievements, or the two singular foreign policy achievements of the Carter administration, are in the news again today for tragic reasons. Those are, of course, the crisis in the Israel-Gaza conflict, and also the Panama Canal treaties, which Donald Trump has been speaking about his desire to reclaim the Panama Canal recently. And so it does appear that if we look at those achievements in a new light from our vantage point of today, they look less secure and more fragile than they did even a few years ago. It was certainly important that Carter committed himself to the peace process as he did, but the fact that Palestinians weren't included in those talks, the fact that the West Bank problem, the issue of settlements there, was not resolved, and the fact that the use of the language of autonomy rather than sovereignty or self-determination meant that the seeds of continual conflict were going to emerge from the Camp David Accords and from the Oslo Accords later. Carter was a man of his time. I think that in his vision of a policy of potential non-intervention, of putting human rights at the center of a US posture in the world, there was the possibility for a different kind of US power that would not lead to the emergence of the crises that beset his administration and has beset other administrations as well. So Carter himself mischaracterized or misunderstood third world nationalism and the opposition to US imperialism, or the perception of US imperialism in the world, which made it difficult for him in the context of something like the Cold War to deal with a really changing world. You know, the world in the 1970s was on the cusp of a transition between two world orders. But I think that it's precisely because that vision is so powerful and so attractive to so many Americans, especially in the wake of the geopolitical chaos that's come out of the legacy of the Iraq wars that we're still dealing with at the moment. That is that's an attractive vision, and one that I think could be looked at again and built upon in order to uh, both to make real those commitments to human rights, and also to help solve some of the crises of the social fabric of the United States that have rocked the domestic political scene as well.